Okay, today we're off our regular topics, Pesach topic. We'll talk about a question called Safek Issur Mashehu. So to start, excuse me, I'm going to give first just a minute of background just on the Issur Mashehu itself, so we can understand in the pratim when we get to the Safek Issur Mashehu. And that is, midraisa, chametz is bata b'shishim just like any other Issur. Makes no difference. With Rabbanan, if chametz gets mixed into food on Pesach, then the chametz is also no matter what, b'mashu, even the tiniest amount, no matter what, there's no bittul on that. Whether it's lach b'lach, yovish b'yovish, if it happens on Pesach, it's not bittul at all. That chumrah, that chametz is also b'mashu, is only if it happens on Pesach. If it happens before Pesach, even if it happens on Erev Pesach after Chatzos, even when you're not allowed to eat chametz anymore, then it's still bittul. The regular rules of bittul apply. Okay, so we have a chumrah that chametz is also b'mashu. We have, so to speak, a kula that the Issur Mashehu does not apply if it happens before Pesach. Okay, so there's one exception there's one exception to the kula part of it, and that is if chametz gets mixed into food before Pesach, and the taruvis is it's yavish b'yavish, then it's usher to eat it on Pesach. You could eat it on Erev Pesach after Chatzos, when chametz is usher, but it's not b'mashehu yet. But once Pesach starts, you cannot eat that taruvas, even though it was bought before Pesach. Okay, so again, well, it's like, we'll call it chayzer v'nir. It's not technically, it's not chayzer v'nir, but it's like being chayzer v'nir. That in that case, yavish b'yavish is also, even though it happened before Pesach, it's also eaten on Pesach. Okay, those are the general rules of Issur Mashehu, which we'll see come up a bunch of times today. Now, the person can talk about a lot of variations of the exact same shaila. And that is, someone on Pesach realized that there was a piece of wheat or barley mixed into their food. And the shaila tends to be in one of two things. Either the shaila is, I'm not sure if this grain is chametz, the thing that's in it's chametz, or I know it's chametz, but I don't know if it was nice and tam into my food. Okay, so a million variations of questions of what happens to that thing. So of course you throw out the grain. The grain itself, that's the easy part. You throw that out. The question is, and the amount of Issur, the amount of time that one kernel of wheat or barley could give into your food is ritual b'shishim b'shishim. It's one kernel into a whole pot of food. But the shaila is, but it should be asur b'mashehu. If it was nice and tam, then it was asur b'mashehu. Okay, so the question is, so it's a safek about what could only be asur b'mashehu. It wouldn't be asur b'daraisa, of course, it would be b'shishim b'shishim. So the only possibility is maybe the time that it gives is asur because it's asur b'mashehu, and therefore it's a shaila of what to do now. It's a safek of what's at most an Issur Mashehu. Okay? That's the question. Now, the cases that the place can speak about have nothing to do with us. I mean, most of us are never going to see a piece of wheat or barley in the middle of their food on Pesach. I mean, it's like such a strange, for us, we don't deal with those kind of things. Although I heard an interesting question yesterday. But most of us are never going to see that in real Lamaisa. But the rules that they make, that we're going to see based on those shilas that they all talk about, we're going to have at the end an actual practical application for us for nowadays. Okay? And this shilah starts with the Gemara. The Gemara has a machlokes about a din called nisbaku. Okay, maybe I should back from that, sorry, because it's not yet. Okay, a piece of barley was cracked. Okay, and cracked in such a way that it's a shilah that maybe that's a sign of chimutz or not. Okay, that's a case called nisbaku. And so machlokes in the Gemara what the din is about that case. So the Rif says that it's a machlokes, potentially of a Safek D'oraisa. So Safek D'oraisa l'chumra. So if you have a piece of barley that qualifies for this thing, then you shouldn't eat it. Okay, what happens if some of that barley got mixed into your other food on Pesach? He says, so it's mutter. He says it's only drabanan, so it's mutter. Okay, now the Rama has a pshat in what the Gemara,
drabanan because it's mashu.
So the Rif doesn't say what the drabanan is. Okay, the Rama has a pshat of what the drabanan is, but most learn that the Rif is saying because it's Safek Issur Mashehu. At most, it's only asur b'mashehu. That's how most learn. It's at most it's just an Issur Mashehu, and therefore, so it's a Safek drabanan. It's a Safek drabanan l'kula. Okay, and that's brought in the Mechaber, you can see it on the screen, a Kashrus that nispashel, and you found this Sa'arim that if it was really nispaku, then it's asur, because that's chametz. V'imloy nispaku mamish, if it's not really nispaku, it's not relevant to us what that means, it's not really nispaku, then a tav shumutter. Okay, and then the Mechaber ends off, because you get rid of those, because those are Safek D'oraisa l'chumra on the actual kernels of wheat or barley, that's an actual Issur, that's a Safek Deraisa. But the Tavshil, where it's only Shaliv D'Rabbanan, there we say Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. Okay, that's what the Mechaber says. Okay, so Mechaber passes like the Rif, that Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, but you see there's an empty space there. Okay, because that's where the Ramah says, the empty space is where the Ramah says, Ve'en minute came. Okay, the Ramah says, no, it's not true. We asked the whole thing even if it's loy dispaku. Okay, so
when is like a mamash?
I feel loy dispaku mamash. I could. The dispaku mamash, even the Mechaber was machman. So this last case where the Mechaber was the second case where the Mechaber was mikkel about the tafshil, the Ramah says we're machmir about that case. Okay, so question: so why is he being machmir? What's the reason for his chumrah? Okay, so I saw three explanations for them. Okay, the first two are not so accepted. Okay, the third one is the real one, but let's do one at a time. One is, the Avnei says, he has a whole chat of what the Machlokes and Mechaber and the Ramah is about having to do with what the reason why the Issur Mashehu, B'chlal, what the reason for the Issur Mashehu. Okay, all the people since him ask lots of questions of what he says, because the way he learns the Pshat and Mechaber seems to be fakir from a different Mechaber. That's not relevant to us. He says the Ramah holds that the reason why chametz is asur b'mashu. What's the reason why Chazal made that Issur? They made the Issur because chametz is loy b'diluminate. People don't avoid. So used to eating chametz all year round. There's a chashash people might eat it. So Chacham had to make an extra shmira and say that's asur b'mashu. That's the reason why it's asur b'mashu. And since it's a strict type of Issur d'Rabbanan, so Safek d'Rabbanan is l'chumra in this case. So Ramah is being machmir because he doesn't agree with the Rif's rule that Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula in this case, because this is a special kind of D'Rabbanan. It's an extra, the D'Rabbanan is extra chomer, and therefore there's no Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula in this case. Okay, so according to the way Avnei Nezel learns, there is no such rule. We Ashkenazi would have no such rule that Safek Issur Mashehu would be mutter. Okay, that's how Avnei Nezel learns. Okay, as you'll see as we go on. Everybody disagrees with that, okay? Almost everybody disagrees with that, okay? Everyone's going to say that the Ramah does not mean that. That's not what he means, okay? So the first one, who's right on the din itself, is a Rikveger. And he says, yes, of course he agrees that Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter. Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter, just like we understood from the Rif. But in this case, there's a special reason to be machmir in this case, and it's based on Taisus. And that is that in this case, what's the shaila that we have? The shaila is not whether there's a mashu of tam from that kernel in our food. There is definitely a mashu of tam of that kernel of food. The shaila really is the kernel chametz or not? That's the shaila. And since the shaila that we have is on a shaila of a deraisa, the kernel itself is a shaila of a deraisa, so once we paskin that the kernel is also a deraisa, then when it's niskalgal, when we say that the Rabbanan fallout of that din is also usher. Okay, once the decision had to be made that the kernel itself went to Mechaber, the chita, the servant does it, you burn the chita, because that's a Safek Deraisa. Once that's the real shaila, is what's the status of the grain. Once we decide that the grain is also midaraisa, then the fact that later it develops into an application where it's a Rabbanan, that doesn't make a difference, and we still say Safek Deraisa l'chumra because of the real shaila is on a shaila of a deraisa. Okay, so it's in this case, really in theory, we would say Safek Issur Mashehu would be mutter. That would be in theory, we would say that. But this is not a case of that, because here the Issur, the shaila is really on the deraisa, and once we've settled the deraisa, now we're sort of stuck with that decision, and you have to take that all the way through. Okay, that's how Rav Krieg learns. Okay, but the truth is, even Rav Krieg is agreeing on the original din, saying just that the Ramah is a special chum in this case. But most of the Achronim actually are even, so to speak, more makel than that, and they think the Ramah is really makel even in that kind of a case. But it's a special. They say that the Ramah holds that we passing like that sheet in the Gemara. Okay, remember I told you this whole thing starts with the machlokes in the Gemara. Is the case of Nispaku should be mutter also. That starts with the Issur in the Gemara. The rest says, I don't know, there's no psak in the Gemara, so we could be machmir like this and make like this. And the Ramah learns, they say the Ramah really holds that we're machmir on or we act as if we're machmir on the shaila of the Gemara. Once we're machmir the shaila of the Gemara, then there is no suffix over here. It's for sure also. Okay, so that's how they most learn. Okay, so either a Kiveger or this. Both of these two things that I'm telling you at the end are both agreeing that in theory Safek Issur Mashehu would be mutter. That's in it's a regular Safek D'Rabbanan, but there's a special reason why in this case you should be machmir, either because it's a Safek Deraisa or because some kind of special didn't have to do in this guy. Okay?
Doesn't anybody? I mean, they're more very often. You can tell where he's coming from. He's showing him.
Right. It's very not clear. Right. That's the right.
Why wouldn't? Does anybody suggest That's Semitic. I don't know. We have tons of chumras in Pesach, for not no real good reason. That's Semitic. That's Semitic. We're not going to Pesach finish. End of story.
Machlis for this specific case? Or you mean just in general about Safek Issur Mashehu? No, what's your minute?
All we know is this case.
In this one little case.
Clearly, in this case, another case, we're Makron Pesach, finished. Without, halachically speaking, you'd be Muslim, we're Makron Pesach. We're defining exactly what the case is.
Right, so that would leave us all hanging, because we wouldn't know what happens when we come to the next story, what to do with it.
Okay. Listen, but doesn't nobody suggest that?
I didn't see that. I didn't see anybody saying that.
Why are we so certain there has to be some halachic, we don't, like a lot of things that we don't pay, so we're just saying,
okay. I'm not sure what to say. Fair question. Okay, so where we stand now, so far our conclusions so far is Safek Issur Mashehu even according to our most mutter. Okay, again ignoring Davnei Nezer. Safek Issur Mashehu really is mutter, except we have one possible exception: is if the primary Safek is a shayla of a deraisa, then we would not say Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter. Okay, that's so far where we're standing at conclusion wise. Okay, now the Achronim then asked. I think we're going to have 4 questions on this Ramah. If the Ramah really holds that Safek Issur Mashehu agrees that he holds that it's mutter, they're going to, if I'm counting right, there are going to be 4 questions on that from Ramah himself saying other dinim that he says that they're going to ask Kashrus based on that. Okay, and the first is like this. I told you at the beginning that there's one of the things that the Ramah says is that if chametz is bottled before Pesach, it's mutter, except if it's yavish b'yavish. Okay, but if it's yavish b'yavish, then and the chametz was bottled before Pesach yavish b'yavish, it's not mutter when Pesach. You're not allowed to eat that when it comes to Pesach. Okay, look at the example that the Ramah gives. The Ramah gives one example of that din. Okay, here's his example. Okay, so if you look at the din, it says here Hagah v'nagnas or Rishona that and the Sarah chametz comes with Pesach samach. It's not choyz avinir. We're makel that it's not choyz avinir. But he says b'chol taruv shulach balach umi b'davar yavish and his Arab as yesh lachos taruvis. It's got to be usher. And what's his case? His case is pas shenafal yayin. A piece of bread fell into wine, and you pull out the piece of bread. Okay, you pulled out the piece of bread. You can't drink the wine on Pesach. Why? The chashin and shem nishu pirurim v'nosin ham Pesach. You're concerned that the piece of bread fell into the wine. You pulled the bread out. You got out whatever you could, but you never know. There might be a crumb or two floating around in the wine. So it's a case of it's yavish balach. Okay, it's yavish. The piece of the crumb is floating around in there, and that's, so to speak, choyze vinir, and it's also that's his example of yavish b'yavish, which is usher and Pesach. Okay, well, isn't this a case of a Safek? He even says himself, the chashinan, isn't this a Safek? It's the most that's usher is usher b'mashu, and it's only a Safek. It's only a Safek that maybe there's a crumb in the, again, you take out as much as you could. The bread and whatever crumbs you found, you took out. So at most, as a Safek, maybe there's piece of chametz in there. So if Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter, so then it should be mutter. So choyz avinir could be usher. Okay, no problem. Choyz avinir is usher, but it's only a Safek if there's Issur in there. So it should be mutter. Okay, that's a question according to this, and a lot of people bring down. But the Earl Shabbos gives an answer to that. Earl Shabbos appears on Orach Chaim, and he says like this. He says this, even though Safek Mashehu and Safek Mashehu is mutter, he says this one is also mishum the high svega karav lavadahu. Okay, he says it's almost for sure that if you drop a piece of bread into wine, that some crumbs are going to float away. He says it's almost for sure that's going to happen. A lot of Achronim bring that, including the Biur Halacha. Right, so it means you're saying is I can get it down to the point that it's not so for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good question. I don't know. I know the answer. But
you have to include the strain or something.
You're saying you would have been mechuyev before you decided it was a Safek, you had to have strained it anyhow. You say, so how much could be left after? Okay, it's a fair question. But I don't want to care so much about the case about the Ramah. Really, I want to see the rule that's pulling out of this, which is that a Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter. Again, we said maybe if the original Safek is a deraisa, it's not mutter. It is a strong chance that it's really usher. Okay, that's what he says. He says it's only when we have a reasonable Safek. But if the Safek lean towards saying that it's probably usher, then we're not going to say Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter. Okay. Okay, that's our first the first question on the Ramah. Okay, another question comes like this. The Ramah says a thing like this. Here's this thing. He said like this. He says if you had a chametz knife, okay, a knife had been used for during the year. You used the knife during the year, and on Pesach you cut food with it. Okay? You cut an apple with this knife on Pesach. So he says you should not eat the food because there might be chametz stuck onto it. But if you go ahead and you mix that food in something else, okay, instead of an apple, you cut a potato, okay, so instead of the potato, you could now ground the potato and make a kugel out of it, so then you don't have to worry about that. Then it's only a Safek, then you're allowed to eat the potato that you made out of it, okay? Now, the assumption is that, the knife, you don't leave knives that are terribly dirty around, so there's probably a little bit, there could be some schmutz on it, okay, there could be something on it, but the amount of chametz that could be left on there is minuscule, okay? Meaning it would be batal b'shishim. So why could you only eat the fruit, the apple or potato if it was mixed into something else? Why can't you eat it by itself? How much could it be? It's just a mashehu left, and we've seen that the Ramah says that Safek mashehu is mutter. So why can't you eat the food itself? Okay, why could you only eat the food if it gets mixed into another food? Why don't you eat the food by itself?
Okay, it wouldn't be batal in that food. It would be on the surface.
So it obviously, so maybe my apple wasn't a good case because there was an apple, you would see the piece sitting on the surface. You would see it on there.
It's very hard to see it. Hard to see it, but it's like smoothing to the surface. I'm sorry. I thought you meant it's possible to remove it. If you can't remove it, then it's a taruvus. So why that's mutter? Taruvus is mutter. It's there someplace, but you're allowed to eat it because you can't find it. If you can't find it, you can't find it. But this would be taruvus that happened on Pesach.
It happened on taruvus happened on Pesach, right? So it'll be usher because it's a mashu. That's all right. It'll be usher, but it's only a Safek. You don't know that there was chametz on the knife. You have no idea what was on the knife. So maybe there was chametz, maybe there wasn't chametz. Who knows? So it's only mutter. Wait, in the second case, it's also taruvus. And it happened on Pesach. But you're being mattered because you say it's only the mashu. It's only a mashu, and it's a Safek. So Safek mashu. That's why the second part is mutter.
This would be right. The Safek deraisa. You would be selling for Safek deraisa.
What's the Safek deraisa?
Is there a piece of chametz on this knife? Is there a piece of chametz on it? There's a piece of chametz. Right?
No, because no one cared about the knife. The shaila is, if there was chametz on it, chametz or not chametz, the shaila is, does my potato have chametz on it? That's what I care about. Now my shaila here is, can I eat the potato? Can I eat the potato? The amount that would have been on my
knife that I might have had chametz on it. I chopped a bunch of potatoes, okay? Now, if it's someplace, I can't find it. Right,
so it's a taruvus. Okay. So now my shaila is, can I eat the potatoes? So that's my question. Can I eat the potatoes? So the potatoes that are there, the amount of chametz that could possibly, the worst case scenario is it's mutter midaraisa. The worst case scenario is it's batal b'shishim.
Well, what kind of taruvus is this? It's yavish v'yavish. It's not lach b'lach. I don't know.
Yes,
it's the surface of the thing.
Yes, yavish v'yavish.
I can't find it.
Yes, it's yavish v'yavish. But it's only a case of Safek. Okay, so
it's a shachat taruvus. I don't know how to categorize it. It's batal b'shishim. It's batal b'shishim.
Yeah, batal b'shishim.
By yavish itself, is there a shaila if you say that it's going to ask him to mashu or not?
So you missed the beginning. Yes, yes. Yavish should be asamash, but it's only a Safek if there's a chametz. So that's what we said. If the Ramah says that Safek Issur is mutter, why is in this case Safek Issur? It's only asamash. So the answer is, I don't have this on screen, I'm sorry. It's not coming on the screen. And that is, the Chazon Ish says, you see from this Ramah, this is what Yossim's trying to say, just in the Chazon Ish says it. Chazon Ish says, you see from this case, that the only time Safek Issur is not mutter if there's a possibility that the person might actually eat the chametz directly. Meaning, in this case, when he cut the potato and the piece is there, he can't find it. But the crumb will be sitting right on top of a piece of potato. So when I put it to my mouth, the crumb will touch my mouth and I'll eat it as is. Okay, not exactly, not because it's yavish, but because I'm going to eat it as is. I'm going to get the piece will actually touch my mouth. And somehow that's worse. As opposed to, in the second case of the when I make something out of it, at that point it's so mixed into things, it won't be on the surface of anything. It'll be blended in, and then I'm not going to actually touch the chametz. I'll eat it together with a big plate of food. That's the case. That's a regular, so to speak, a regular taruvus. This kind of taruvus is somehow worse because, actually very good. It's as if touching your tongue, the chametz touching your tongue somehow is worse, even though when you eat the salad, that it's all in, or the kugel, it's always going to touch your tongue. But someone will always eat it like couched in other things. Here, you might put the piece in and it'll be the first thing to touch your tongue, and somehow that's worse. Okay? I'm not really sure what that means. Okay? So he says, so now we have our third rule, okay, and that is,
if the person is going to, the Safek Mashehu is mutter except, if it might be the right. If it's a good chance that it's also, or the Chazon Ish is saying is, if there's a chance you're going to eat it as is. Okay? If you're going to eat the chametz, somehow the chametz going to touch your tongue is worse than if it's in a taruvin, and that's why the Ramah, in that last thing we said, I don't know, whatever it was, tough samak sign, I think I remember, tough mem zayin, said that in that case, you can't eat it until it's mixed into a second food. Okay? Okay. Now, last, yeah. We have a question like this. A different Chazon Ish asks a question like this. The Ramah says, you had a case like this. You had a pile of wheat, and it rained on it. Okay, the Duggan was in a house, and it rained on it, and you don't know where the rain fell. Okay, the rain fell onto something. Okay, some of them. Okay, so now there are some that you could tell for sure got rained on. Those you take out. The rain, of course, will turn the grain into chametz. It gets wet. It's into chametz. Fine. So you take those grains out. What about the rest of them? Okay, what about the rest of the grains that are there that you don't know? Probably some of them got wet, but we don't really know which ones got wet or how many of them got wet. Okay, so the din is, the Ramah says is, you can keep them. You're allowed to own that on Pesach because it's considered Safek Issur. Maybe they didn't get wet, and maybe if they got wet, they didn't become chametz. Okay, so you're allowed to keep them. The Issur Bal Yirah doesn't apply, but you're now allowed to eat them on Pesach. Okay, you can't eat them on Pesach. So if I remember correctly, comes from an ogur, this chumrah, to say you can't eat them. When the Beis Yosef brings it, the Beis Yosef says the reason for this din is, I'm going to read it to you, I'm sorry it's not on the screen, he says is, even though it's going to be mutter, me Safek, you're allowed to keep it by raw. Okay, you're not makel to eat it. We're only makel to keep it, we're not makel to eat it. Okay, so the Chazon Ish says, takes that, so to speak, as is, and the Chazon Ish says that even though this is a case again of Safek Mashehu, okay, the amount of some of the kernels are going to be chametz, but obviously the vast majority are not chametz. Again, you got the really bad ones out. So he says the reason why is because there's a special chumrah that when it's yavish be yavish, then we don't say Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter. Okay, when this of course is yavish because there's 1,000 kernels and 3 of them are chametz, so each kernel is distinct from the next one. So he said by yavish we don't say Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter. That's what the Chazon Ish says. Now the Chazon Ish doesn't explain why that should be, nor does he bring a makar to that. He just that's what the Ramah is saying. So there's
now we're holding the Safek Issur Mashehu.
Safek Issur, correct? Yes, it's a Safek Issur, correct. And he said, but since it's yavish, that's worse. So now, at first when I saw this, I thought that it had to do with the previous Chazon Ish that I told you a second ago. That says if you might bang into it when you eat it, that's worse than if it's betaruvus. But that's not true. That's not true because in this case, no one's going to ever bang into this because nobody eats kernels of wheat. Okay, kernels of wheat get turned into flour that made into matzah. What do you say?
You can't do it. You can't take that. You can't be miraculous. You can hold it.
No, it's bottled already. It's bottled already. No, it's already bottled because there's 1,000 kernels. There's 1,000 kernels here, and 5 of them got wet. So it's bottled already. It's bottled already. So it's just a matter of can I grind them up? No one's going to eat them as is. I'll grind them up, and once I grind them up, then it'll be fine. So it's not because he's saying that it's because it's yavish. The reason. So he's saying some other thing. So whatever this other thing is, I'm not sure, and I don't know what the makar for it is. But there's a bigger question on that pshat, and that is the Chazon Ish is not the only one who gets this kasha. Why does the Ramah say now to eat them? Okay, piles are achronim, the Paz and I forgot who Chogakov. All piles are achronim ask what the Ramah is talking about. Why does he say this? And they say the reason why the Ogur and Beis Yosef brings that you're not allowed to eat this, the reason for that cheetah, why they hold you're not allowed to eat it, is because they hold a special din. Safek Issur doesn't matter you to eat chametz and Pesach. Safek Issur is makel on matter all kinds of deraises. That's no problem. But Safek Issur does not work for eating chametz and Pesach. It's extra chomer, and Safek Issur doesn't work. That's how they understand what the sheet of this Ogur, I think it's an Ogur, who says this din. They say, but guess what? The Ramah, who knows how many places, there have been all kinds of rights that the Ramah hold, Safek Issur does let you eat chametz on Pesach. So even though there is such a shita that Safek does not make you to eat chametz on Pesach, that might be true. There is such a shita, and that's what this shita in the Beis Yosef is based on. But that's not the shita of the Ramah. The Ramah himself, they bring a bunch of rayas, holds that Safek will let you eat chametz on Pesach. So he said that can't be, that's the pshat in the shita, but all the Achronim say they disagree with the Ramah. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah says, he says, don't follow this thing. He says, maybe what it means is that if you have a choice, you could use different grain, why not use something else? Why, if you could wait till after Pesach, why not wait? Why have a possibility of a shayla? You could use something else. That's like the most you have to do. But that's minatin. If you need it, no problem, you could use it. They disagree with the Ramah. They say the Ramah, at most, it's just saying, if you have a choice, why not wait till after Pesach? Okay? Keep them, but don't use them. But be'etzem minatin, you could eat it. So, everyone that says that is essentially telling us not like the Kashrus. Kashrus is giving a whole pshat and saying the reason why it's usher is because when it's yavish, it's an extra chumrah, and everyone's telling us no, it's not true. There is no such thing. This thing, the Ramah does either he doesn't mean it or we don't agree with him, whichever way you want to say it. Okay. So so we back to our 3 rules. And I did not put the other Kashrus here because everyone seems to not agree with that. Okay, and now to our application. Okay, and our application is rice cereal for infants. Okay, I'm talking about flakes, the rice cereal in flakes. I meant to bring a box of it. I'm sorry, I forgot to. And that is like this. What is rice cereal? Basically, think about it as the company cooks up a big pot of rice. Okay, but they cook it so much that it turns into like a porridge. Okay, it doesn't, not pieces of rice. It's just a big porridge, a big huge pot of mush. And then they put it onto a drum dryer. And a drum dryer, basically, you pour this onto a very hot drum, and the water boils out, and you get left with like a sheet of dried out rice porridge, like a thin sheet of it. They grind it up, and it turns into like flakes. Okay, the flakes look like, I don't know, like flakes. I don't know, little flakes, like little pieces of dandruff. I don't know, maybe bigger than that. Okay, just flakes of rice cereal. And then if you take it home and you put some water into it, it turns back into a rice like mush, and you can feed it to a baby. Okay, that's what it's for. Okay, that's what rice cereal is. So assuming that it's just rice or just not chametzic ingredients, so you would say the first look at it you would say is you give it to a baby on Pesach because babies still allowed to eat kidneys. Okay, if that's all the babies and certain people are allowed to eat kidneys on Pesach, so it's kidneys. If the other ingredients are not chametzic, then you should be good. You should be allowed to serve it to them. Okay, now the problem is. The problem with saying that is that the same people who make rice cereal, make those infant cereal for rice, they also make oatmeal. Okay, they do the same thing. They make the exact same mush out of oatmeal, and then they make it into flakes, and they serve oatmeal instant cereal. Okay, now, if even one of those oat flakes would be in the rice cereal, okay, that's an example of yavish yavish. Yavish is because the flakes are very distinct. Each flake, it's not flour, it's not a powder that you can't see one from the other. They're flakes. If you put them on the table, you could very much see each flake is you could see which one it is. You can't tell which is oats and which one is rice. So you can't tell that. So it's a taruvis. But the flakes are distinct. Each one is its own thing. You could see it on the table. There's 100. You can see each of the pieces. That's a taruvis yavish biyavish.
Why would I think there's oat flakes in here?
Because the same companies that make rice cereal also make oat cereal. So of course they clean. Of course, mosque they clean, and people are very makbid on allergens, and they don't want to have that. But all we need is one oat flake to make it aseh b'mashu. Okay, so all we need is just one. Just one would be enough to make it aseh b'mashu. Okay, so to make it usher. And since it's yavish b'yavish, the Ramah says yavish yavish is chayzev v'nir. Regular tavruz, you wouldn't care. It happened before Pesach. Don't worry about it.
Like flour?
It's not like flour. No, it's not like, no, it's not a powder.
It's the size of the granule that makes it
That's why I wanted to bring it in so you would see it. When you look at it, you see in a second that it's yavish yavish.
Like the flakes that you feed your goldfish.
Yeah, if you have goldfish. It's the same thing. The flakes are big enough that the yavish yavish. It's not a powder. This is not a powder. This is that amount of flakes. That's when you drum dry things, they come out like that. I mean, you could grind it fine, but they don't. It comes out like flakes. So the shaila was that maybe it should be considered yavish b'yavish and it should be aseh b'mashu. It should be chayzev v'nir. The example the Ramah says of being chayzev v'nir. Okay. However, so from that perspective, it should be aseh. But from the other perspective, now that we're thinking about the Safek Issur Mashehu, and this question came to Rabbi Reese, Rabbi Raka, the past few days. They've been talking over maybe like a week or two ago about this question, which was be'etzem al Safek Mashehu al Yavish.
They consider this to be a Safek or a Vada.
That there's a piece of flakes in there? No, it's only a possibility. We don't know if there's flakes in there.
I mean, when you look at the equipment, depending on, I don't know, sometimes.
It's hard to believe they can't be even a Safek. I mean, it's like, okay. But anyhow, but they said it was like this. They said,
I'm saying it might be even hard to believe it's not a Vada.
so let it be a Vada. Okay. Let it be a Vada. Even if there's a Vada, well, let's say it this way. Even if there's a Vada that flakes get into the rice. Yeah. But in my box is not a Vada. Right? In the whole, 10,000 pounds you made today there is. But in my box, there's no Vada in my box. You know what I mean? So I have only one box in my house. Okay. Now, there's another possibility to be made, which I'm not going to talk about, which is called Toilim B'Drabanan. Since it's the Rabbanan, I could be told that my box is the one that didn't have the Isur. Put that on the side. We're talking about Safek Issur Mashehu. So they said was that they talked about this idea. And here let's think about we say Safek Issur Mashehu is mutter except in 3 examples, and you'll see that it doesn't mean any of those. Okay, which is like this. The first is if the original shayla is a deraisa. No, that's not true over here. There's no shayla with deraisa here. The oatmeal we're assuming is deraisa. Assume that oatmeal is asim with deraisa, is chametz gomer. The question is just, is the oatmeal my food? So the shayla is not a deraisa. It wasn't a shayla is what fell in chametz. The shayla is did it fall in? The shayla is did it fall in? That's not a case of nisgalgo. Okay. The second is there a strong chance that the oatmeal fell in? No,
because even if it fell in,
it's going to be, even if it's only be Asib Mashehu, only Midrabanan. So we could therefore say Safek Mashehu is going to be mutter. But if there was a strong chance, the Shabbos said, if there's a strong chance that it happened, then you can't say Safek Drabanan in this case, which there's not a strong chance. I mean, come on, basically it's rice. You know what I mean? We have no reason to think that the doctor in it. And the last is, do we have to be choishish that the person is going to eat the thing by itself? So again, no, it's the same thing like I told you about the kernels. Nobody eats the flakes by themselves. Okay, nobody eats flakes. The flakes get reconstituted with water to make them back into this mush that you serve to the child. So it's also be Safek Issur Mashehu. Again, unless
I don't understand that.
Okay, nobody. The third thing was that the Chazon Ish had said.
No, I understand, but why doesn't this qualify? You might eat it as is.
Nobody eats it as is. Nobody eats it. Nobody will ever eat a flake by itself. You always would put it back into water and then mix it all together and not eat it.
So when you mix it into water, it's not yavish anymore?
No, it's not yavish anymore. No. Now it's just a mush. Now it's lach. No, it's not yavish anymore.
Uniform thing. Is that a bunch of flakes together?
No, it's not. It reconstitutes. The water puts it back in and it turns back into porridge.
One of the reasons why we're machmir by yavish?
Because?
Because we're talking about a case that can be mixed back into water.
No. You missed it. The case of the Ramah is this little crumbs floating around in wine. Okay, there's crumbs in wine, so the crumbs are yavish and you might drink it. But if you're going to turn it back into a lach, so we would be machmir, but not for Safek Issur Mashehu. This Chazon Ish should be machmir when you might put the food right into your mouth. That's not going to happen over here. But etzem we would have been machmir. Okay, so the only possibility to be machmir is that other Chazon Ish, which I told you nobody holds like. I mean, the other Chazon Ish who says is that if it starts off as yavish, if it starts off as Safek yavish, then you don't say Safek Issur Mashehu. Okay, so according to that would be the only possibility of a case to be machmir. And therefore, I also want to write, I'm sorry, that when Rabbi Reese and Rabbi Raka thought about it, they said, yes, it's fine, so it's mutter, so you're allowed to use it. They said it's preferable to make your own. It's really easy to make rice cereal. But if you can't, or whatever, some special reason, then they said it would be okay to use it. They said, yeah, if not, so why not make it your own? I mean, it's really, there's recipes all over the internet of how you make your own baby rice cereal. It's not like so complicated. But if they said, if you can't, then they were going to be decided that it's a Safek Issur Mashehu.